This podcast is brought to you by Craft Beer and Brewing Magazine for those that love to make and drink great beer. To learn more or to subscribe, visit beerandbrewing.com or find us on social media at Craft Beer Brew. For this special podcast episode 300, we have got the gang back together. That's right, the gang from the West Coast IPA panel back in January. And we're going to call this one West Coast IPA Revisited. Evan Price of Green Cheek, Kelsey Minair of North Park, Vinny Schillerza of Russian River. Welcome back to the podcast, y'all.
Yeah. Hey, guys.
Thank you.
Good to see everyone.
Good to be back.
Thank you, Jamie, for bringing the band back together.
Of course. Well, I'm sure people out there asking, why are we following up that panel discussion? Turns out that episode struck a chord. It's on track to be our most downloaded episode in the history of the podcast. As of this morning, almost 52,000 downloads,
wow.
Which is just an astronomical number for us. Anyway, this sparked a lot of discussion for everybody involved. We thought it'd make a lot of sense to share with you some of those conversations, some of the back stuff. Anyway, we've been having these conversations together on text and whatnot since then, and then just kind of made sense to get back and talk about things again. Plus, I mean, after we finished up, Vinny texted all of us the next day. He's like, I had so many more questions that came to me that night as I woke up in the middle of the night. Anyway, we're going to try to get to some of those questions, go through that. And I figured, what a better way to commemorate the 300th episode of the Craft Beer and Brewing Podcast. 300 episodes, 6.6 plus million downloads. It's like 5,000 downloads a day of this crazy little podcast that we do.
God.
Thank you guys. Thanks for listening. Yeah.
Hey, congratulations too. Like Craft Beer and Brewing, the magazine and the podcast has really become a kind of a part of the fabric of the beer scene, both for commercial and homebrewers. And it's really cool what you and your partners and staff have done, Jamie. And you guys are a print magazine for one. That's got to be pretty difficult. And then you're on the road all the time, which can't be easy, family life, that sort of thing. So thanks for all you do for the industry too.
You're going to make me cry, Vinny.
Man, I think I speak for Kelsey and Evan.
Absolutely.
100%.
Hands down the best magazine that is able to include so many different aspects of the beer industry. I couldn't be a bigger fan. And so it truly means a lot to me personally being included in this panel and just being involved in your magazine. Because I'm a fanboy, I guess is just the easiest way to put it.
Feeling is mutual. Anyway, I didn't bring you on to talk about this, and I don't want to say on that.
We could talk, all day about it.
All I want to say about that is that we wouldn't be able to do what we do unless you all and other brewers out there that share with us share for everybody. We are just a conduit for that, and we would have nothing if it weren't for all of you all who trust us and engage in these conversations and want to put those out into this broader world of brewing. It's just a nice thing that we are able to capture, edit, structure, curate these conversations with folks and bring them out there for it. But we couldn't do it without all you all. So, hey, kudos to everyone who's ever been on the podcast, anyone who's ever shared a homebrew recipe with the magazine, everyone who's shared the way that they do things and helped make the whole world of craft beer a better place for brewing. Anyway, thanks to all of you all. For this episode, I invited folks to send in audio questions, kind of direct fire style like we've done in the past, and I've got a bunch of those. I know we have our own questions. And I want to kick things off with a question about attenuation and liquor to grist ratio, because Vinny's got some background they did on that. Before we do that, for years, G&D Chillers has chilled the beers you love, partnering with 3,000 plus breweries across the country. They're proud of the cool partnerships they've built over the past 30 years. They know brewing doesn't stop at 5 o'clock, and nor do they. G&D uses quality components, expert craftsmanship, and constant innovation. With 24/7 service and support, your brewery will never stop. Remote monitor your chiller for simple and fast access to all the information you need, providing you with peace of mind your operation is running smoothly. Reach out for a quote today at gdchillers.com or call them to discuss your next project. This episode is also sponsored by BSG, exclusive distributors of Raw Malting Company, producers of quality malt since 1847. Is your Pilsner looking flat, wishing you could show off moose-like foam stand? or looking to boost mouthfeel in a hazy, look no further because raw dextrin malt is here to improve your beer. Better body, improved haze formation, and stable foam. I mean, it's practically magic. Visit bsgcraftbrewing.com to learn how. And if you're Old Orchard mentioned in the brewing community, don't be surprised. The flavored craft juice concentrate blends from Old Orchard have shipped to over 46 states. Their new brewing customers often mention discovering Old Orchard through the word-of-mouth recommendation of another brewer. To join the core of Old Orchard's brewing community, learn more at oldorchard.com/brewer. Plus, if you head to CBC in Nashville, join us and our friends at Country Malt Group for the one-stop party at Yeehaw Brewing Tuesday, May 9th from 7 to 10 p.m. It'll be a great night of music, great collaboration beers, great people, just steps from the convention center. So come on out, say hey. We'd love to see you there. Let's kick this off, Vinny. Why don't you recount to us some of the work that you did following up on the podcast, talking about attenuation, liquor to grist ratio, and talking to some other luminaries here in the brewing world.
Yeah, I think we should maybe start with Evan, just giving a brief kind of synopsis that he shot me a quick email.
Yeah.
And I mean, you can take it from here, and then I'll take back over. Does that sound good, Evan?
Yeah, I mean, it was funny because you and me were talking about the liquor to grain ratio thing on the last podcast, the thinner mash resulting to a lighter body in your finished beer. And I had experienced that from a practical standpoint since you and I had that conversation, I don't know, a year ago, 8 months ago. I can't remember exactly how long it's been. I had a friend, though, shoot me a text who, MBA brewer, way more intelligent and techie on that side of things than I am. And he was like, funny enough, Evan, you actually had it right. And so I ended up grabbing the MBA practical handbook from the raw materials book and looking up into that. And it absolutely is the opposite of what Vinny said. And so then I'm like even more confused because I'm like, how am I getting I'm getting the exact opposite results than what the book says. And so I shoot Vinny a text about this whole thing or an email, and just kind of just speaks volumes to like Vinny as a brewer, to where like I think most people would just brush this off as a like, oh yeah, this little pipsqueak is kind of saying this thing, and whatever, I'm right, you're wrong, and like that's that. But instead, Vinny is such a scholar within brewing, to where he wants to find the answer as clearly as possible, and so he starts getting some people involved. And so I think, Vinny, you could take it from here, because I would love to hear that you're part of this whole story.
Yeah. So that was definitely that. We, aside from all of our experience at Russian River, which is that a thinner mash, a slightly thinner mash will give us a slightly drier beer, and a thicker mash will give us a little more residual sugar, which I'll explain why we're doing that as it relates to hop creep. But yeah, I instantly went like, well, gosh, maybe I do have it wrong. Maybe I am off. But I was trying to remember where I got it from, and I remembered it was in John Palmer's book, How to Brew. And he talks about it, and I have it right here because I knew this was going to come up. But he basically says a thinner mash of more than 2 quarts of water per pound of grain dilutes concentration. And then he goes on to say that basically you end up with a more fermentable beer, thus a more drier beer. So I emailed John and asked him, where he got that from. And it ended up coming from Evan Evans, who last year released the mashing book, which if anyone listening doesn't have it, it's a fantastic masterclass on mashing and anything related to that. So
it's dense. It's super dense.
It is. Yeah, I think it can be very technical. So that was, so I definitely, found some information that goes along with what we've seen at Russian River. But as I started digging into this, what I think I've really come to learn is that the science is not settled on this for sure, because there's the MBA book that Evan referenced. Then there's I found the Dr. Lewis, Michael Lewis book back, when he was at Davis, where he talked about, he agreed with what the MBA book said. I even reached out to Carl Ockert, who edited the raw materials book, and he says, no, all the research I've done points towards what we wrote was correct. Of course, I spoke with Garrison, our head brewer, and what we've seen at Russian River, we've worked it on both sides. With STS pills, we didn't want to extend the mash rest, because given any mash, let it sit long enough, and you can probably get the conversion you want, as long as your temperatures are okay and you're not denaturing the DP. And so we took STS from 0.35 gallons per pound of grain to 0.37 to make it a drier beer. And then on the flip side to that is, when we start getting up into these high dry hop loads, let's just say above 3 or even 4 pounds per barrel on some special beers, we're just getting too dry of beer, because those enzymes in that much hop load was drying the beer out too much. And I don't know about the other guys, but when we use dextrin malt to try to gain body back, it just seems like it exacerbates hop creep, and the enzymes in the hops just keep going. I don't know why scientifically that is. Oddly too, if you use too much dextrin malt, there's this kind of grainy mouthfeel that you get. And
Totally.
I never realized it until years ago. Brian Hunt from Moonlight Brewery, great local Sonoma County brewery, we would hang out a lot drinking beer, and he would always taste that in a couple of our beers. He goes, "You use, dextrin malt in this?" I'm like, yeah, I do. He goes, "Yeah, I can just taste it." And it took me a long time to figure out what that was. But I do know that for whatever reason, dextrin malt makes it's perfect feeder for the enzymes. And so in some cases, we've hit the top limit of temperature for an IPA that we're doing, let's say 4 pounds per barrel. And so we needed to pull some other lever. And that's where we go the opposite direction with liquor to grist ratio. I did also reach out to the great Joe Hertrick, who is well known for working at 3 of breweries in America throughout his career. He's just a textbook on anything malt related, and he's someone I go to a lot of times for technical stuff like this. And he wrote me a really thoughtful email, and he's such a good teacher. And he always explains things well, but he basically just said the basic teaching when I was coming up was thinner mashes slightly favor diastatic action, and thicker mashes slightly favor more proteolytic action. And he goes on, blah, blah, blah. He also goes on to say, and this is the part that I really like, and kind of how I've always explained it, was my intuition is that this is all about accessibility of the substrate. Just like grinding finer increases accessibility to the substrate, thinner mashes increase the accessibility of the substrate, and with more accessibility, meaning free movement of the enzymes to extract for increase of fermentability. And then he gave a really cool example of this. He goes, in practice in the 1990s, when trying to mash high attenuation malt liquor and high attenuation non-enzyme light beers, I found that moving the mash from 1.1 barrels of water per 1,000 pounds of grain to 1.3 barrels of water per 1,000 pounds of grain, that the thinner mash slightly increased the RDF. So I'll just finish it with saying
Super cool.
that I think the science maybe is a little isn't quite completed yet, but a really interesting conversation and topic, and I just know what works for us at Russian River, how we thicken it and thin it, just to make some really minor moves one way or the other.
Yeah, thanks for sharing that.
And if anyone out there listening has more studies that they've done themselves on this kind of thing and some data to share with us, I mean, I know all of us would love to pursue that. Since we're talking about malt right now, we can kick it off with our first audio question from somebody that you all know.
Hey fellas, Ben here. Thanks for sharing so much great info in that first podcast. I have a ton of questions that I'd love to ask you all, but there's one thing for each of you that I especially wanted to follow up about from the first pod. The first set of questions is for Vinny and has to do with fan and shelf stability in IPAs. Vinny, what metrics are you using for fan in your beers? Do you shoot for a percentage of wort fan in the finished beer, or is it an absolute value? Also, how do you think excess fan actually changes hop flavor and aroma? And where does fan increase from dry hop additions play into all of this for you?
Anything else, Ben? Anything? Is that all? Is that all?
Yeah.
Is that all of it?
Yeah.
Let me ask you one question with 6 questions in it.
Well, and before
he has 2 more questions that come after this that we'll get to later on for the other 2 of you.
Oh my God.
Don't worry.
And before I go into his question, a huge congratulations to Ben Edmonds. He was just awarded the 2023 Russell Share Award for Brewing Innovation from the Brewers Association. Natalie and I were just up in Portland a couple days ago, so we got to share a beer with him and some actual other past Russell Share winners, and got to celebrate and raise a pint with him. So congrats, Ben. You very well deserved. So
that's my friend, Ben.
Awesome. Yeah. So
we're gonna get to brew with Ben at the Brewers Retreat in a couple weeks here.
Yeah.
Super excited about that.
Absolutely. Yeah. So speaking about fan, definitely, as we all know, that it really has one job, and it's there for yeast nutrients coming from the malt. But there's been some recent research that you do get an increase in fan from dry hopping, and I've kind of theorized that I wonder if let's say with hop creep, are the enzymes using some of the fan to make the fermentation happen? And that actually something goes back to that Joe Hertrick talked about on an MBA podcast years ago, where he mentions that like too much excess fan can help bacteria grow. So that actually got me thinking, well, could that also aid in the secondary fermentation once the enzymes break down the sugar? Is the yeast actually using the excess fan to help in a fermentation? I have no idea what the answer is. It's just something that's been on my mind, and why I believe I mentioned this in the first podcast, that I think using rice or whatever you use as the adjunct for cold IPA might actually make cold IPA have a better shelf stability.
Life.
And we've used rice in a few beers, IPAs, and we're just in the early stages of measuring fan. And I can't remember off the top of my head what our absolute fan number is, but we are looking at the end number at the end of the beer. We don't know necessarily what to compare it to, other than, we know that that fan isn't good for beer in general. It's what drives Strecker degradation and oxidation in beer. And we all know that in general, IPAs, for the most part, just have a poor shelf life compared to other styles. I mean, we as an industry have put a style on our shoulders that we've grown on. It's probably the worst style we could ever build an industry on. Have poor shelf stability. Like, couldn't it have been Pilsner? I drink STS at 6 months or a Pivo at 6 months. It was like, it's just getting into its prime. So Matt,
there's still time. There's still time.
Yeah, Matt and I always joke in our next life we would just want to come back as lager brewers only. So anyways, to answer his question, we are looking at just an end number, but I don't know that we have anything to compare it to. We're trying to build our own database, if you will, and we don't always have time to measure fans. So but it's just an ongoing project for us.
I was talking to Kevin Davey last month, and he mentioned you mentioning cold IPA on that last episode, and was very appreciative of you supporting his strategy around this. So a lot of love there. Let's talk a little bit more about this, and let's start talking about hops, because if we let this go the way the last one did, we might just talk for an hour plus about other things and not get to the subject of hops that people want to talk about. Before we do that, AccuBrew announces the addition of specific gravity to their suite of brewing tools. AccuBrew predicts specific gravity during fermentation to help ensure consistent results and detect problems early. AccuBrew is dedicated to providing brewers with the tools to create the perfect brew. Whether you're a seasoned pro or just getting started, their suite of brewing tools will help you achieve your goals. Monitor the fermentation process with their intuitive mobile app, adjust your recipe as needed, and achieve the perfect brew every time. Join the AccuBrew community today and meet the developers in Nashville at CBC to learn more. Also, ProBrew has always been a dedicated and trusted partner to breweries, especially when they make the leap to canning their product. That's why they only sell rotary can fillers, which significantly reduced product waste and produce higher quality product than an inline can filler. Need proof? Visit ProBrew at booth 433, as well as at their party at Yazoo Brewing at this year's CBC in Nashville. To RSVP to their event or schedule time with them at the show, visit them at probrew.com/CBC or email contact us at probrew.com. ProBrew, brew your beer. And Indie Hops breeds new hop varieties to help brewers captivate beer lovers. Indie's unique varieties, Strata, Lorien, Luminosa, and Meridian, are trusted by brewers worldwide to modernize, brighten, and diversify their beer lineup. Indie also offers classics that thrive in Oregon terroirs, such as Chinook, Crystal, and Sterling. Thoughtfully crafted and selected hops to meet your brewing needs. Visit indiehops.com/podcast and stop by their booth number 2131 at CBC to discover what's new in hop flavors. Indie Hops, life is short. Let's make it flavorful. Let's kick into another question here, and this one's from Phil from Berg Gilman Brewing. Back in 2020, he was simultaneously Alpha King and a GABF gold medal winner. Here's Phil's question for you all.
Hi, Jamie. Hi, guys. First off, I'd like to thank you guys for your contributions to the industry. So, in terms of recipe design, I find the more people I try to please, the fewer people I impress, and vice versa. Yet, you guys all make very impressive beers. How do you strike that balance? How do you make crowd pleasers that continue to impress year after year? What key things do you think makes your beer the way you make it? Thank you.
We should kick that one off with Kelsey. Why don't you take this one, Kelsey?
Well, for me, it's just kind of the endless quest for making our beers, relevant in the moment, and we've all talked about this, but, recipe evolution is something that, we're always doing. And anytime there's, some new process that can keep, our flagship beers, relevant with, anything that's new and current is the goal. I mentioned this on one of the prior podcasts, but for me, it's not about making a consistent beer. It's about consistently making the beer better. And I think that's the approach, whether it's a technique process, getting more involved in hop selection, working on the grain bill and tinkering it over time into the place that it is today. Is it going to be the way that it is today in a year, 2 years? I don't know. Because we're going to continue to try new things and try new hop products and keep moving our standards into a place that hopefully keeps people really excited about them.
How do you balance though that idea that because you have your own personal taste and you're going to brew a significant amount to that, and you're also going to watch how customers respond to these things, and you're going to watch how judges, which are generally peer professional brewers, are also responding to these things. And so in a way, you almost have three different audiences that you're speaking to, and you're dealing with inputs that are coming from a lot of places too. How does that impact the way that you start actually making changes? I mean, it's easy enough to taste someone else's beer and say, I want to make something like that. It's harder to rub a new hop and say, oh, I can go do all this mental math to figure out what this might ultimately, taste and smell like in a beer, and what's it going to take all of this to build a recipe around that. How does that, how do these changes happen for you in that way?
I mean, these things never settle into the core, right away. We're not necessarily making those experiments with hop foo, but we will make, a lot of different new beers all the time. And, that's a huge part of our program. I mean, we have 2 beers that we brew, consistently. And then everything else is either something new, one-off, something that people really loved that we want to bring it back. And that constant ability to experiment, we don't do a lot of distro outside of our own distribution. We are self-distributed. So that is a bit of a luxury for us to be able to, make new things all of the time. And when a new process works really well, in one of these one-offs or a collab or something, or, I get really inspired tasting, someone else's beer. Maybe I go up to Green Cheek and, I drink Evan's stuff, and then I ask him how he, what he did there. And, we'll experiment in something new. And if it works really well, then it makes its way back to the base, and it's kind of, it pumps up the base and keeps it relevant and keeps it exciting. And I mean, really that's the process, but
You're using these kind of smaller brands as like a farm league, and if some of these techniques and things, rise above and start to shine, then they can make it up into the AAA and then the big league.
Yeah, absolutely.
We use our R&D, research and development brand, so we've developed a whole brand just around this, and so sometimes those beers are only on our little 5-barrel pilot brewery, and sometimes those brands make it all the way up and we brand R&D under an actual recipe on the big brew house. But it's given us the ability that every time we make R&D, whatever, today it'll be IPA that we're talking about, that it's different every time, but we're testing new processes. I've ever since hearing Kelsey on the show the first time where we talked about using the flowable pop products and how he adds them in. Well, that wouldn't work at our scale. So I've been working on a way to do it in such a way that it'll work at Russian River. So I've been testing it on the pilot brewery, and then that's now going to move up to a pub batch in about a month. And maybe,
Nice.
And I have something in mind in Windsor on the big brew house next year for a new beer that'll come out to use it, but it just wouldn't work for us the way that Kelsey does it. And, but yet, the results are definitely there. So, to go back to the original question, you could just create a brand around it too as a professional brewer.
How do you balance this, approach to winning medals, which you all do, with consumer love for those beers? Sometimes those things align. Sometimes they don't necessarily align, not just in IPA, you can certainly look at it in the hazy IPA side where when you see how, which beers are winning medals in those categories, you can tell that it's a group of professional brewers that are judging those, not necessarily a consumer audience. How do you manage through that, Evan?
Yeah, I end up taking the approach, which is a lot of our beers take this approach where we are kind of seeing what the audience sort of feels like with certain beers. Our hazy beers, as an example, we really want to see what that audience thinks and feels about those beers. We're looking at those untapped ratings, and we're kind of manipulating the recipe and in order to sort of get the results that we want, which is people happy, right? For our West Coast beers, it happens to be just a thing that I personally am in love with, and I'm not trying to do anything other than what I personally want to do with that specific beer style. And so that, I think, is one of the reasons why I've held on so tightly to it as well, is that it's something that I am like dearly in love with. It's something that I drink if I'm sitting down to have a beer. And so it has been incredibly rewarding to have this thing that is exactly the way that I want to make it, hit a few times for medals and stuff like that. And so I think that is pretty fun, instead of this other approach so many different times where you're making a Helles or you're making some of these other beer styles, and then you go taste somebody else's and you're like, oh, that's the thing I'm missing. And instead, when I'm drinking my West Coast IPA, like, I think it's one of the best beers in the world. And I don't mean that as a, ego crazy man, but I mean it more just that the coolest part about this job is making it exactly the way that you want to make it.
Let's kick in another question here on the brewing side, and this one's for Kelsey.
Second question is for Kelsey. Kelsey, you mentioned that you were using Chico with ALDC as your house yeast. How has using this yeast and knowing that you don't have to worry about diacetyl from hop creep altered how and when you dry hop and cellar your West Coast IPAs?
Sure. Well, we've kind of taken a, more pragmatic approach to our dry hopping, and whether we're making a West Coast or a hazy, they pretty much follow the same steps. And before we were using Chico with ALDC, built into it, and we were just adding ALDC and using, other Chico yeast. We didn't really modulate the dry hop procedure, but we always anticipated some hop creep. And even if you don't have, diacetyl to be concerned about with ALDC in the yeast, you still can have some attenuation challenges. And so we've, our steps to kind of combat, the attenuation issues for a long time. And I remember, I don't have the source in front of me, but I remember, I was talking to Julian at Beechwood, and he had mentioned, that using some simple sugar in the kettle and kind of preparing the yeast for a very simple sugar component of your fermentables would result in less hop creep because you've got that simple sugar in there at the start. And beers that had dextrose added versus those that didn't seem to have less of a, perpetual attenuation issue. And so I thought that was interesting. And I did look it up, and I found some white paper that had some of that information. So pretty much anything that we do that gets dry hop does get a small charge of dextrose in the kettle. And then also we dry hop pretty much every beer with a very small amount of hops when we're about 1 Plato prior to terminal gravity. And that's when we're at a stage where we can go ahead and pull the yeast out. And so we'll harvest, and then, we'll hit it with, typically it's cryo hops, but it'll be, a pretty small charge, like 11 pounds and 15. And again, I feel like we're getting the kind of enzyme in there, through those hops at a place where the fermentation is winding up, or winding down, I should say. And, just as a strategy, then we're getting to, the end of fermentation. And when we add our large hop charge, when we're fully attenuated, or at least where we expect to be, at that point, we're not really seeing a whole lot more movement. And, if we're at, we're going in at 1 Plato, prior to terminal with that first charge, and we're trained for a, West Coast 2.5 finish. We usually get pretty darn close to it, and we don't see, continued attenuation at that point. So as a strategy, it's been working very well, and it's kept our tank times, very tight, But yeah, I'd be curious to see, what you guys think about that approach.
Kelsey, I had a question. I had a question for you, Kelsey. Sorry, Evan, real quick. That was from our last podcast. Do you know off the top of your head what your percentage is between like your first hop edition that you said was maybe 11 pounds to the second bigger edition?
It's.
And I'd be curious, Evan, do you do the same thing?
No, I mean, so I don't, well, he's looking into that. I mean, I don't do the same thing, but I think one of the things that I jumped out to me was cryo hops having less vegetative matter, like, from my understanding, don't create as much hop creep. Vinny, you'd know better than I would.
Yeah, that's been our research, and with a beer that's all Simcoe or mostly all Simcoe. And that was actually another question for Kelsey was, if you're trying to get the hop creep started, have you ever tried it with just T90s, or does that just make it go off the rails?
We have, and I'd have to go back and look at some recipe sheets and just kind of see if that caused more issues.
Yeah.
But to answer the question you had, it's about 14% of the total
Yeah. So it's small.
hop charge. Yeah, so it's very small.
Yeah.
Yeah. So, sorry, was there more I needed to?
No, I think you did
No.
it, dude.
Okay.
You did it.
No, but Evan, I interrupted you. So
Yeah.
what was your?
Sorry, Vinny. The question was how do we treat the dry hop?
Oh yeah, but I think you were going to ask Kelsey something. I interrupted you. So. But,
Oh no, it was actually the thing that I mentioned to you is more just the cryo aspect of that. You
Right.
know,
yeah.
where I mean, and this is a question that I have been wanting to ask anyway, and this moment couldn't be more perfect. But it's like I know that we as a brewery end up having a hard time depending on hop creep. There are times where it's there, and there's times that it's not. Now, the thing that I want to happen is I want some hop creep. I personally like those beers the most, where we get a little bit of a secondary fermentation from that dry hop, and I think those beers end up tasting the best and smelling the best. And so the problem is that there's times where, and we're scratching our heads like crazy trying to look at lots, and we're looking at as much information as we can without a lab. I have a microscope, and that's all I got in my lab. I'm looking at it right now. Anyway,
Yeah.
I'm trying to understand. I think, Vinny, you're the hop creep king at the at the moment, where I think you've done the most presentations on the subject. And so how, I guess, can I depend on hop creep?
Yeah, so talking about hop creep, the last time we talked, I talked about making acid additions to at least keep the diacetyl in check.
Yep.
One thing that I don't think I talked about, and something we implemented, was we moved our zinc additions from the whirlpool to the cold side.
Yes.
And I just did since the last West Coast IPA panel we did, Tom Nielsen from Sierra Nevada and I did a big hop creep presentation at the California Craft Beer Summit, and I talked about this, and Chris White was in the front row applauding, moving zinc to the cold side. And it basically lowered our zinc addition, but it made it more consistent. And it took a lot of work to trial it out to figure out what it was. But the idea is that, it's not getting bound up in the trube. And, maybe one beer you're at 0.5 pound per barrel in the whirlpool, and maybe it's 1 pound on the next one. And maybe you can still calculate it out, but it just became a lot more defined. And the result of that was we ended up with a much more consistent fermentation. So we had cleaner fermentation for one, but also the hop creep got a lot more consistent once we got our yeast health in order. And the zinc just happened to be one of the things. So we are at 0.08 grams per barrel of wort on the cold side, roughly. And that's less than we were on the hot side. And those zinc numbers seem to be a lot more consistent. One of the other things that we presented, and we've had this kind of under our belt at Russian River for a couple years now. In one of my slides from the presentation is so you've got the bracts that are the leaves on the hops, if you will. But we decided after we did all this hop seed study where we were dry hopping with seeds, basically crushed seeds. What happens if you dry hop with the strig, and the strig being the stem of the hop, and you will get hop creep from the strig too. So the enzymes are actually living in the strig as well. And so in an Amarillo that we had, this is some 2020 work we did that had almost at 2.9% seeds. The strig only dry hop, so we call it dry strigging at Russian River. It dropped the gravity by only 0.09, which so not a huge amount. But when we took Simcoes from that same vintage, and those Amarillos were from Oregon, the Simcoes were from Washington, that only had 0.1% seeds, so virtually no seeds, the gravity on the strig only dropped 0.58. So there isn't a correlation to any of this, which kind of feeds back to your original question of how do we predict this. And Tom Nielsen did present a test that they use at Sierra Nevada that he's also using on some of the hop quality group experimental hops as well to try to predict some hop creep. But I still think that's one of the $1 million questions is how do you predict it? Because we too sometimes see batches that over attenuate and others that under attenuate based on hop creep, and that's exactly what you're saying. So, but this thing with the strig just is another big question mark that's over my head right now, like a cartoon,
Sure. Yeah, I think just trying to continue to figure out how to predict, those results is such a frustrating part as an IPA hoppy brewer. You have this time window while we dry hop warm around 68, 66 degrees, and with this time window of the moment we're adding hops, we are hoping to be in a good spot within anywhere from 48 hours to whatever 4 days is in hours, 96.
96.
And it depends on the beer, depends on the hops and everything else. And I just hate these moments where we are just, the aromatics of the beer are changing as we are waiting for that to creep into the right spot sometimes. And it's maddening because there's a sweet spot where that hop aroma is as good as it's going to get, and then it's going to start to fall from there, where all that fruit that you've developed that is so front and center then starts to kind of drop off, and this vegetal thing starts to creep up that I can't stand. And that is this, I guess that's like, the sort of thing that I'm still with the same question mark over my head trying to figure out is how to depend on what that is. And anyway.
Well, and I think you've got, some of that ties into, dumping the cone, which we talked about last time. And I think we all had somewhere in the same range, but not exact. But I'll go back to yeast health is something that has really helped us. But we also see that if we don't let the beer sit long enough, we'll have too much sulfur. We have a lot of aldehydes in the beer, and that's just stuff that we don't want. And so we found that we need to let Blind Pig, I believe it's at minimum of 5 days, and Pliny is 6 or 7 days, whatever it is, to just let some of the flavors develop as well. But all the while, we've dumped the cone.
Yep.
We're going to talk more about that in a second, especially when it comes to dumping the cone, because I've got a few questions from folks on that. Before we do that, no matter what you are canning, Twin Monkeys Beverage Systems has the solution. I just opened up a can of Kelsey's beer, and it's sprayed all over my face. The things that no one gets to see when you're listening to this on audio.
Oh, we saw it. Yeah, we saw it. So good.
Anyway, with a versatile lineup of quality canning and packaging equipment made in the USA, their Troop, that's Twin Monkeys Troop, is ready to customize a setup for your craft business. Need on-site training or help with your installation? You got it. Visit twinmonkeys.net today to learn just how easy it is to get your craft into cans. Also, Brett is wild, it's unpredictable, gives funky notes to beer, and evolves in time. Historically, it's been used with little control, but Fermentis has harnessed it. Discover Soft Brew BR8, the first dry Brett by Fermentis, now available in 105-gram packages. Sorry, that's 100-gram and 5-gram packages. Are you coming to CBC in Nashville Monday, May 8th, 2 to 4:30 p.m. during CBC hours? Fermentis has teamed up with the Brussels Beer Challenge to congratulate all American winners of last year's BBC. After the ceremony, stay for a casual Soft Brew BR8 Barnyard Bash. Try some beers brewed with Soft Brew BR8, mingle with their experts, ask them all your questions. See you there. And ABS Commercial has been a full-service brewery outfitter for over 10 years. They are proud to offer brew houses, tanks, keg washers, and small parts to brewers across the country, as well as equipment for distilling, cider making, wine making, and more. Contact them today at sales@abs-commercial.com to discuss your customized brewery needs. Going to the Craft Brewers Conference in Nashville, stop by their booth to connect with their brewery consultants and enter for a chance to win a Keg Viking keg washer. ABS Commercial, we are brewers. Yes. I'm going to pat dry myself off here. And in the meantime, I'm going to give you two questions. These are two in a row. They're both about the same thing. And so I figured I would give you both of these. And Evan, I think these are directed at you.
Oh, no.
Hi, this is Mark Sebring from Mineral Springs Brewery in Minnesota. In the last panel discussion, you talked about dumping the cone the first day after knockout. Can you talk more about the benefits and the off flavors that you avoid? Great podcast. Thanks, Jamie.
Last question for my homie Evan. You mentioned early fermentation cone dumps as a way to avoid mercaptans. Can you go into a little more detail about when you're shaving your cones and how you think that's improved or changed the overall hop expression in your IPAs? Cheers, guys. Thanks.
Yeah, so do you want me to start, by the way? Do you have anything else?
I think Ben wants you to answer that one.
Okay, you just talk a lot, so I'm just making sure that you got it.
Oh, you were waiting with that one. I can tell. You had that one just teed up for the right time.
Oh, man.
But I deserve that. Thank you, Evan.
Hey, whatever I can do. So when it comes to shaving the cone, dumping the cone, at our brewery, we don't like to say the word dump. We reserve that only for the time that we're actually dumping a batch. And so I think my friend Jesse, I ended up getting this term shave from, and so that's what we use. But long story short, when it comes to our kettle in our Orange location, actually at both locations, isn't necessarily the widest cone. Or sorry, our kettle. I think I was saying our kettle is not the widest kettle at both of our locations. And so when it comes to adding whirlpool hops, I feel like we are prone to potentially pull more hops from the kettle into our fermenter than maybe other breweries are set up for. I go into some of these breweries that have these wonderful whirlpool set up that are just really wide, and they take up a lot of space, and I would really love to have that. But we have a kind of a taller, skinnier kettle. And so anyway, we were in a spot of continuing to kind of get this mercaptan character in our IPAs, and I couldn't quite figure it out. And I feel like this is probably another conversation with Vinny that helped me get to this spot, because we had talked about mercaptan at some point. And anyway, we've gotten to this spot where we will brew a beer, and the very next morning, we are coming in, and first thing in the morning, we are getting rid of anything that's out of the bottom of the cone. And hopefully that beer hasn't just fully exploded into fermentation. It's just like, it's kind of gradually coming up so that we pitched correctly for something like that. And so that ends up helping, and then we'll end up shaving the bottom of the cone again at the end of the day. And yeah, when we were in a spot of getting these mercaptan characters, we were just trying anything and everything, and I think that ended up being an absolute game changer for if you're getting kind of a fresh cut white onion character in your beer that is absolutely polarizing. It's not your dry hop. It's something that is coming from that trub getting carried over to your tank. Did I answer all the question? I don't know. Did I? Like, you tell me. I feel like I
Are there any other off flavors beyond the mercaptan that you find, or are there any other benefits that have come from shaving the cone?
Hey,
I love that term, shaving the cone. That sounds so much more like refined and elegant.
Yeah,
and
that's what we do at Green Sheik. We refine and elegant everything.
It's the art of shaving, right?
No, one other funny thing to throw out there that is embarrassing to say, but this is like a podcast of learning, and so I think it's a great time for this, is that like we went a long time without cleaning our mash tun, and we were just hot rinsing it. We have little spray balls underneath, and I felt like that was sufficient. The whole thing's hot. It's getting hot. Boom. Long story short, when we started actively cleaning our mash tun once a week using a proper CIP and pulling up the plates and everything and making sure that everything looks good, this other mercaptan-like character that I couldn't diagnose, that was just off-putting in the beer, and I wish I had a better sort of, it was like a weird funk that I couldn't quite like pinpoint. And once we started doing that, we also got some just cleaner hop character in the beer. But yeah, I think, the main things that I feel like battle as an IPA producer, the mercaptan thing is challenging because the brewer really needs to be watching that end of knockout. As we're setting that wort into the fermenter, if you're not cutting off, in our kettle, if you're not cutting off that transfer at the right moment, you're going to pull too much of this true pile into the tank, and it will absolutely, in my opinion, ruin the beer. And at that point, you gotta blend or you gotta dump. And so that's one. I think that's one thing that is good to just keep in mind.
I think another thing here too is that that mercaptan flavor can come from yeast autolysis. So
Yes.
if you aren't pitching the highest quality yeast, which up until recently, when at our new brewery where we just had much better yeast health, like we were pitching lower viability yeast because that's all we had. And I think a lot of small breweries out there are in the same boat. And so dumping the cone, the next morning, first thing when you get in, so we do the same thing, just gets those dead yeast cells out of the bottom of the tank, because they do generally settle to the bottom of the tank. Maybe not all of them, because we do see some of that at the top of an open top fermenter that we can skim. But I think it's a good practice for any beer, just in case you don't have like the absolute best yeast health, it can get it out of the bottom of the tank, or at least most of it.
Yeah. And then Jamie, to finish your question, now that you're asking about off flavors, I think like that's one big off flavor that we're trying to avoid. Diacetyl is obviously, a big off flavor that we're all very conscious of, and we are all working to avoid. And I think with the help of ALDC or whatever you're doing in your brewery, I think you can achieve that. Being aware of acetaldehyde, if you are trying to do really quick dry hop times. I know that for us, like, one of the best things that we can do when it comes to New Zealand hops specifically is a 48-hour contact time, where we are getting the brightest, freshest, like Kiwi vibes on our IPAs by we go through fermentation, we harvest our yeast, we have the beer warm, and then we're dry hopping this beer, and 48 hours later we are crashing the beer. And we need to be very aware of acetaldehyde in these moments, and every once in a while we don't quite hit that window, and the beer suffers a little bit on one end, where that bright fruit changes a little bit, but then beer's a constant.
So you're saying longer contact time will start to develop more acetaldehyde?
Oh, sorry, no, it's the opposite. So
okay.
the
You need
acetaldehyde
to
is
let okay.
the acetaldehyde is going to clean up. The yeast is going to clean up that acetaldehyde with time, but like you just need to be aware of that as a brewer, of kind of nosing or smelling that. And some of you out there, of course, have a lab that can test for these things, which is absolutely wonderful. We, on the other hand, just use the best tool in the brewery, which is our noses. And I think that this beer is just this constant trade-off of, all right, well, I'm not going to have this really awesome bright fruit, but then I'm not going to have acetaldehyde. So, I guess that's kind of where we end up. And then the last thing I think we're, trying to avoid as IPA producers is just that fermentation sulfur, that sulfur dioxide. I think when sulfur dioxide is mixed with these new school hops, you end up getting a dank character that you think potentially is the hop that you used, and instead it's just you not being completely aware of the overall fermentation of your beer. And so I think that is an important part where I've definitely had beers where we have roused them up until that sulfur dissipates, and then that bright fruit will show itself again.
That's what I was saying earlier, Jamie, about like having like Blind Pig and Pliny are two main IPAs having like minimum warm days, let's just call it, after the dry hop, because when we would drop the temperature of the tank too early, we were getting this acetaldehyde kind of pumpkin gourd, the pumpkin is what everyone described it as. And we had this vision that we called quick crash dry hop that I maybe talked about before, and where we were trying to basically get the hops in and out before hop creep would even start. But we ended up with acetaldehyde and sulfur, everything Evan just talked about. So now we've just created these minimum amount of times that the beer needs to sit. But we're dumping the cone, and with good yeast health, we're not seeing the diacetyl spike, even though the beer is just sitting, clearing up some of these flavors, because there is good yeast health that we've had. A few years ago, we would see the VDK grow through the roof as we waited, but that doesn't happen anymore, thankfully.
Well, it kind of goes to, I know, because every brewer is concerned about that excessive contact time driving more vegetal character, and so again, like you say, Evan, this is just a balance. Like, you're going to lose one thing, you're going to gain another, and there are some things that are just going to be hard and fast where we just don't want this at all, and so we're going to give up whatever it takes to get there.
Hey, can I say one more thing? Sorry to interrupt you. Is that one thing you have to think about too is the polish on the cone of your tank. Let's face it, most breweries don't have as highly polished cones that, say, a Zeeman tank would have, where they literally polish the entire cone of the tank. It's the most amazing thing to see. And I remember going to the Zeeman facility and was with our friend Floris DeLee, who Jamie, who lives in Fort Collins there and has been on the show. He's like, this is what makes a Zeeman tank, and they're polishing the entire cone. And so, we see on our pilot brewery that we need to dump the cone a lot more, because all the hops aren't just sliding down immediately like they do on our big fermenters. And so I think, being a small brewery, you have the ability to more easily dump the cone every day and trying to get the hops out, because it's not just all going to happen at 24, 48 hours, whatever your cone shaving time is.
Yeah. I mean, you hit the nail on the head, though. I mean, for sure. I mean, we have, if we are trying to go anywhere faster than very slow with that shave, we are channeling beer through, and we're not getting the results that we need, which is getting yeast and hops out of that tank.
Are there specific hops that create or that demand different treatment through that dry hop process? You mentioned New Zealand hops being something that you pay extra special care on, and we all know that different hops behave in different kinds of ways, especially in that environment. Are there some that become that require special treatment through that, or maybe longer times in order to get where you need them to go, or any other kind of temperature adjustments to truly achieve the kind of results you're looking for?
Kelsey, what do you think about that?
Well, I mean, we tend to keep the temperature up, so we're usually dry hopping at 70 degrees. And we'll do a temperature ramp at the end of fermentation. We ferment Chico at 67, and then we let it go to 70 when it gets around 25% left in attenuation. And we keep it there through the duration of the dry hop. And that includes recirculation step. I mentioned last time we recirc dry hops. But usually the timing for us depends on if it's like certain varieties that have, really high polyphenol content, like Australian varieties. We try and keep the contact time on those really short, similar to what you were talking about, Evan, with New Zealand varieties. You like those to be really short too. And I think you get much brighter fruit character and not all that grassiness that tends to, just creep out the longer and longer that those hops are in contact. So yeah, if we're using Galaxy or, a big charge of Nelson, I always try and put those in like in the last step and try and get that beer crashed out pretty soon after that. Given that it tastes clean, we don't have any of these off characteristics that, that have been discussed. One thing that we do that, I think you do this too, Evan, while we dry hop, unless we're doing the recirculation step, we actually leave the blow off intact the whole time. Like there's no headspace pressure, until we're ready to crash.
I mean, we just do and I think I explained this on the last podcast, but it's like we dry hop at the end of the day, and then the very next morning we put 15 pounds of pressure on the tank to push those hops
down.
in.
Yeah, that's right.
And then we go right back to relieving the pressure and then allowing that fermentation to hopefully happen, which I want to predict someday.
One thing here on this topic, though, that is kind of out of our hands when it comes to hop variety is, and this is more broker processor dependent, is pellet density. And it really doesn't matter what variety it is. If the hop is too dense, it's just going to sink to the bottom, which I've seen it before where we've dumped the cone and there's been pellets still intact. But the other side of it is that if the pellets aren't dense enough, then they're just floating, and it's like the early lupulin powder, what became Yakima Chief Cryo. You unless you mix the tank, it just sat on the top, and that was one of the great improvements that YCH made on cryo, and so they have a way of measuring it, and hop companies are paying attention to this, at least in America. But it's actually something I'd love to see the Hop Quality Group do some work on in the future, is pellet density, to know that, whatever the density is of a pound of pellets, however, you'd look at that it's being pelleted for dry hopping, not necessarily for anything else, since that's where we're mostly using the volume of hops these days. And we know that they would get broken apart in the kettle through the heating process. Right.
Love that.
Let's talk a little bit about the kind of creative process of building hop blends. I think that kind of that was something we spent so much on the pragmatic side of things in the last episode, and didn't necessarily talk as much about the artful side. Let's talk about your creative process for how you think about as you are rubbing and smelling hops, how you build some of these memories, how you create a shorthand for what these things are, mentally, and then how you also build some learning around how these things might interact with each other, and then how you go back in and test these mental hypotheses that you build in your head for these kinds of hop processes to see if the results bear out what you thought they would bear out.
Kelsey, you get this one first because I think you have the best hop aroma of the three of our beers as I've been drinking them as of late.
Well, that's really awesome to hear. Thank you. That's wonderful, Vinny. I feel like when I answered this question the last time, I kind of meandered a lot and had a lot of, sort of, ideas about, how I come up with, hop combos, but it really is a lot of, theory. And, we have the mental notes from the rub, like we use these hops in practice and we know that they do these certain things. And then we taste someone else's beer that, uses hops that we haven't, played around with yet. And we, discover that there's new varieties that are really cool to work with. Like HPC 586 has been one that keeps coming back. It's such a, it's one of those great hops that can really play all by itself in a nice way, but it also is complemented, by other things. And it can be a great hop in a hazy IPA. It can also be a great hop in a West Coast IPA. And then we can pair it up with, things like Citra and it works really well, or we can pair it with Mosaic and it works really well because the fruit characteristics from those hops are just very harmonious. And yeah, I mean, really it's, get inspired by trying someone else's, beer and then, just trying things on our own. And, like I mentioned, we're able to experiment a lot because we don't have to make the same set of beers over and over again. And we can just create a new brand, brew it once, and, thinking about how those things work together and then taste it. And, the more you go through that process, the better you get at predicting, how it's going to come out. Just because that's how it works. I mean, it's just that iterative going through it over and over again. And I think that's super cool. Like when you can get into a place where you can start really thinking about the outcome and you get closer, it's just, it only comes with experience. But it's definitely, that's how we do it. I mean, I don't know that there's a lot more to it than that.
Then we'll kick out a question here, not on the creative side, but on the stability side. This is another one from Phil.
So for pushing hop aroma, what do you guys do to max hop aroma in your beers? Are there any particular high-performing hop varietals that you prefer or processes that you use to max out or protect aroma shelf life? Thanks.
The easiest answer, I think, here is dissolved oxygen levels in finished beer. That, I think that is the secret. The secret component to this entire thing is minimizing that as much as you can. And so it's like you will, as hard as you can work to overthink every aspect of your process in order to get that number as low as possible, throw out whatever industry-wide number is considered to be the industry standard. Like that's garbage. Just continue to get that number as low as humanly possible, and you will see the aromatics in your beer last. One funny thing to note on this is, as we've gone down this tunnel, is there were aromatics that we didn't want to keep that were outlasting the better we got with this, and so we had to get better at our fermentation profile as well, because sulfur dioxide, as an example, is one of the first things to get thrown out of the beer whenever you have a little bit more oxygen in that beer. And so I think that is hands down like the number one thing that I would throw out there. And then from there, it's going to be variety specific. We've all seen the survivables diagram from YCH or chart. I don't know. I always forget what's a chart and what's a diagram and what's a what, but forgive me there. Small brain. But anyway, I think that I think it's important to look at information out there like that.
For those that can't see, it's actually a poster on the wall behind Evan in the frame right now.
It actually is.
It is. It's right there. And so, yeah.
Yeah, like for me, like you see that Centennial is the largest on this scale, or on this chart, right? And I mean, I think that hop is garbage. I think that like that what is staying in your beer isn't something that I want in my beer. Wonderful that Centennial has more survivables of shit. But like, I just like, it's like one of those hops I pick out in somebody's beer and I'm like, you used Centennial on this, didn't you? And they're like, and then it's always a very proud, like, yeah, I did. And I'm like, okay. And I just keep my mouth shut because it's my dumb opinion. It doesn't matter that they like it and I don't like it. I'm not going to give unsolicited advice in that area. But yeah, that's my rant.
You know, and kind of something I was going to talk about. I don't know how do you follow that up. Good God. Kind of related to the last two questions was, keeping hop flavor, and the DO was a great, so it's a great thing to work on, and obviously keep your beer cold. But, a lot of times brewers will dance around. They go to hop selection and they want a mixed bag every year put on the table blind. We're just the opposite. I want as much as I can. I want the same farm.
Yes.
I often want the same lots. We're lucky enough to be able to buy some of our hops direct, and there's one of our main hops that we buy that oftentimes, granted, the farm will put this on the table in front of us, but Natalie and I will select the same field every year as well. And I think there's something to that, though, at least going to the same farm and sometimes even the same fields, because there's a consistency there from year to year in the soil and the climate and all that. And so I think that does aid in some consistency to have that hop flavor that becomes your signature of whoever, whatever you are, whatever brewery you are. So
the winemakers figured that out with with specific vineyards and these specific acre plots within these vineyards, and they figured out how to brand those wines. Some of those plots that are producing the very best vines and grapes every year. Hops are a similar. They're not that far off as a crop in that way.
Yeah, and then you take that, and when you are starting to mess around with other, brokers, growers, lots, whatever, doing a single hop brew, and whether you do it on the full scale, which we do a lot of on our pilot brewery, or do it on the bench in your lab, in 1 liter bottles, dry hopping different hops. That's another great way to get to know hop varieties. And if you're a home brewer listening to this, it's an awesome club, project to have different people brewing, single hop with different hops, same base recipe as much as they can be, and then share all that information. Then you really start learning. We've been making hop to it since 1997, 98, and a hop salesman, the original hop salesman for Yakima Chief, Gerard Lemons, would bring me these hops, and that's when I first came across YCR 014, which became Simcoe, and what became Warrior and Atanum, and all those early hops that eventually led to Mosaic and Citron and so on and so forth. But such a great way to learn about, what a hop can give.
I totally agree. I mean, that's like the last question, Jamie, that you were mentioning about like kind of building hop aroma. We do this just about every year as much as we can, with especially a brand new variety where we are making a single hopped IPA on our normal size system, and we are seeing how that works for us. How do those hops age? What does that profile come out to be? Because like I think mentioned on the last podcast, like, it's so deceiving and it's hard to read what the rub of a hop does versus what it's going to do in the beer itself. So once you get that figured out, I think you're in a better spot.
Sure. I should also mention, since we're talking about it, that if you're an all access subscriber to Craft Beer and Brewing, we actually have a fantastic video class on dissolved oxygen and oxygen throughout the brewing process.
Oh, by Vinny. Yeah.
I really enjoyed that.
My favorite part of that, Jamie, was when you and Taylor and I were doing the bottles.
Yes.
and we were like doing different purges, and then we got to the one where we didn't purge the bottle at all, but we made sure we kept on foam, and we were in the back like high-fiving each other, and that was a lot of fun.
That was a great thing to watch, or to watch and see, or watch and listen to as a brewer and beer fan, where like I didn't have a C box at that point, and to be able to just get this easy, I don't know, get this information easily from somebody so validated. It was really cool.
It was eye-opening stuff. Now, throughout your brewing processes, are there other ways, whether it's hot side or even earlier in the cold side process, that you all work to minimize or control oxygen through the process in order, because we all know it's not just about, the dissolved oxygen parameters of your canning line or your bottling line. Good oxygen control starts earlier in the process than that. Are there some specific, steps that you guys have found through that brewing process that have paid off in dividends, in lower dissolved oxygen than going into the system, which then, of course, the lower you start, when you start the packaging run, the lower it's going to be in the package itself.
We're using deaerated water, and I know everybody doesn't have that. And at the surface, any professional brewer that doesn't have it, that's listening, is saying, "Oh, how can I can't afford that." But you actually can if you just have an extra. Yeah, you can make it batches, a single batch at a time. If you have an extra bright tank sitting around, you can, boil some water in your kettle or hot liquor tank, move it over there, and then bubble CO2 through it. And that's a great way to start. And then you just use that to flush all your lines instead of using CO2. That's what we do, and it's a great way to clear lines, because if you have any jogs in the line, up, down, whatever, this is packing the line completely. It's also getting all the, let's assume everyone's sanitizing with peracetic acid with PAA. It's also flushing all of the PAA out of the line. If a little bit of deaerated water gets into your tank, no big deal. If a little bit of peracetic acid gets into your tank, you've oxidized that entire tank.
Yep.
And so I think there are ways. I mean, if I was to tell my brewer self from 20 plus years ago, what would I do different? I would have had a DO meter, but I would also have been making batches of deaerated water as well, like that. And it's not to say that you can't make great beer without it, but it does help. It's also an economic thing too, because then when you're flushing the first bit of beer through your line, and you know that there's some contact with peracetic acid, and you're letting that go down the drain, that is profits going down the drain.
Yep.
Kelsey, any lower oxygen techniques that you guys use in order to maintain that hop aroma and flavor in finished beer?
I mean, it all definitely, to me, comes back to the DO issue. Really, as far as longevity goes, I'd like to think that we've had some. I feel like our process with incognito also may have some residual benefit. I think that stuff tends to keep those beers lasting longer. On some of the hazy IPAs where we were trialing it out at very high dosing rate, like around 2 kilograms for 15 barrel batch, those beers required substantially less dry hopping, and the aroma and flavor, like right out of the gate, was incredibly punchy, and those cans held up really well. Now,
that's rad.
Because the dry hopping with the actual pellets was reduced, visually those beers didn't tend to work well in the long run because the haze stability was just not there. But as far as being just a delicious beer that had a huge hop punch that held on, I was really happy with those results. But obviously, 2 kilograms of incognito is pretty costly for a 15 barrel batch. So there was that kind of downside too.
Can I go off subject here a little bit? I mean, just it's related to the flowable hops. That was a question I had after our last time together. Are you pulling the let's say you're using 2 kilos of whatever variety flowable hop. Are you now reducing your whirlpool hop charge, or are you reducing the dry hop charge to compensate for this, for the flowable hops? Like, where is it coming from in the formulation of the recipe?
I think it's the more for this, Kelsey, right?
Yeah.
Like, I don't like. I was about to say, you're not going to reduce anything. Like more of an like any way that we can continue to just put more hops in it and it tastes really good is like. I think the overall. I'm cutting you off. Go ahead, Kelsey. Sorry.
No, you hit that one on the head. But I will say, sort of mostly dead, which the recipe for that has been in Craft Beer and Brewing. That beer was kind of we were starting to really hone in on some new ways to brew West Coast IPA, and this was very early, like 2020, late 2019. We were really diving into this flowable, hop product as a dry hop instead of a whirlpool edition. And that beer was, we took a very sort of hazy IPA approach to how we were hopping it, in that it got no hops in the kettle aside from its bittering addition, and then everything was loaded in as a dry hop, whether it's incognito, cryo, T90s, but the total amount of solid hop matter in that beer was like 77 pounds and 15 barrels, and on the hop side it was like 4 pounds. So our wort yield was virtually, 100% minus the just the protein trub, component. And then, we had considerable loss in the fermenter because that's just a lot of, dry hop. And at that point we weren't shaving our tanks, with the right tool. We were using a much larger diameter hose, and we were definitely punching holes in the, in our trub in the fermenter, and we weren't getting as good of yields as we are now, with some different equipment. But just to kind of circle back on that, we took that approach for a while, where we were kind of, I had this sort of period of time where I was like, okay, well, let's not cook hops, let's just put it all in on the cold side. And I felt like those beers were really, like, they had a very specific sort of hop character because there was no, flavor contribution coming from hops that were boiled or, in the kettle itself. And we've since gone back and, have added more hops to the whirlpool, and in some cases we are using, a lot, maybe a pound and a half of hops per barrel in the whirlpool, plus, the flowable hop product and cryo and T90s. So, now we're using more hops than ever. And it really is to try and just super saturate it and just give it this explosion of aroma and flavor that, is long lasting. And I'm really happy with where we are with it right now.
There's the quality, question, and there's also the shelf life question, that no hot side hops impact longevity of hops at all. I know that's certainly something some folks have been talking about.
That's a good question. And I think that, we entered nothing but hoppy categories at GABF. And we all know that we're on the same playing field when we enter that competition. Well, those beers are in the package for a really long time. And, when everybody has gotten through the sort of, best case scenario of when those beers should be drank, and the competition is not that, it's past it. To stand out at that point, I have to believe that these beers are holding on for longer, for the reasons that they are just loaded up with hops. So.
Vinny, you've got some more hop questions, I know, in your bank there.
Yeah, and actually leads kind of one of the other questions I had for both of you, and what Kelsey, you're just talking about adding hops back to the whirlpool. What are both of your guys' thoughts on their contact time on the whirlpool? Are you doing an extended contact, or is it just the amount of time it takes to spin the wort, let it settle, and pump it off? And
we talk about
sometimes
time and temperature for dry hopping, but time and temperature in whirlpool, is just as impactful. Right?
And also, are you doing a cool pool where maybe you're I know some breweries have a big tube and shell heat exchanger to cool it down. Others are using water, which is what we do when we cool pool. But I'm curious what both you guys are doing on this.
Yeah. Most of the time we do a cool pool, and we try and do that at 170 degrees. We try and establish all of our isomerized alpha acids from our bittering addition, whether that's a 90 or a 60 first wort. The point is that I want the bitterness to be a constant. And if I'm using certain varieties in the whirlpool that are, higher alpha, I'm not trying to calculate out for that step. And so I try to do it always at like 165 to 170. And generally that's just long enough for us to do the whirlpool, and then the rest, for us, that's like a 20-minute spin, a 20-minute rest, and then we're knocking out. And our knockout typically takes about 45 minutes. So some amount of the wort has been in contact with those hops for, quite a while, over an hour. But at that place, I'm assuming we're only getting a few IBU pickup, for that rate that we're at. But I don't, I'm not sending the beers off to a lab to see, what alpha we're getting from that particular addition. So, Evan?
So yeah, we do the cool pool most of the time when it comes to hazy IPAs. Or specifically dropping it down to like the 170 range. We also do it on weird stuff like English bitter, where we have like the mash tun cleaned out and we're adding whole leaf hops to that, and we're knocking out onto these hops and then not dry hopping these beers. I'm drinking one right now, Uncle Dave's fave. And
that beer's great.
Anyway, dude, 4.3%, like all day. Here, watch me drink this. So good. Anyway.
Looks delicious, and there's a nice bit of foam on top of that too, Evan.
This is something called malt, and it doesn't exist in an IPA for me, but it exists in other beer styles, and I fucking love it. Anyway,
malt, highly underrated. Yeah.
Malt's wonderful. Just time and place. Like other things. So, yeah, cool pool for me is, for West Coast, we're dropping down to about 185, 190. I still want some bitterness from that whirlpool personally. We are also not calculating that whirlpool addition because it's next to impossible at our size to really get an accurate count there. And so so I'm in the same boat as Kelsey, where I'm calculating out our IBU charge. And honestly, we don't even calculate IBUs at all. We continue to use different rates and different hops in order to get results that we think, have the right mouthfeel, have the right bitterness and everything like that. And we just increase the number or decrease the number depending on like what it is. And I know that sounds kind of lame, but I feel like calculations can also do you wrong on that side of things. And in the end, it's back to the most important tool in the brewery, your palate, where just tasting and smelling that beer and seeing how it hits is really like ends up being the most important for us at Green Cheek.
How do you all do that, Vinny?
At our Santa Rosa brewery, we have systems very much like Evan and Kelsey. So we do end up with very much like what Kelsey talked about. And we do a lot of cool pooling. And we've found that on our older, more tired brew house in Santa Rosa, the cool pool also helps reduce some of the grainy notes that we've seen come out of that brewery. Because we're finishing with a higher gravity on the last runnings, and then we're diluting it down And so, until we can someday replace that old brew house, that's been helping us from a flavor standpoint. But in Windsor, at our bigger production brewery, we've got a hop back, and there we very deliberately have very short contact time with the wort, whether it's been cool pooled or not, and we're going over the whole cones, and then it's coming out of that hop back and immediately being cooled down through the wort cooler, with the idea being that we are locking in those super volatile hop aromas, those oils that normally volatilize off, or some of them will volatilize off in the whirlpool. So that's sort of our theory there. The flip side is that we're probably leaving a lot of flavor behind in those hops as well. But I stand behind that because I thought our beers improved immensely when we moved most of our production to Windsor, to the new brewery. So
we probably have time for 2 more questions. Vinny, if you've got some other lingering ones that hit you late night after the last episode.
I do, and I do have one that I have highlighted on my other screen here. I'm curious what you guys think, or even if this becomes a part of your recipe formulation, and it has to do with concentrated hop pellets such as cryo or CGX. Are you guys blending T90s in with concentrated hop pellets? Or, like, I've heard a lot of brewers say that, you don't get the depth of flavor if you're not using some T90s. And I was curious what you guys think, because both of you have like super amazing hop aroma in your beer, and all the IPAs I drink from you guys. And to me, there's just something really full about your beers, but I don't know what you guys do.
I mean, for us, I'm new to the cryo train, where I couldn't tell you how many years ago they came out with cryo. 8 years ago, 10 years ago, I don't. But the first, I know the powder was obviously the first one, and I remember that. I remember trying to dry hop with that stuff, and it just having positive pressure on the tank, and it just going out at the moment you're dry hopping all into your face. Anyway,
it was like the Big Lebowski moment.
Oh, that was that nail on the head right there. So, yeah, I didn't like the first runs of cryo hops that we had access to at a previous brewery that I worked at before I opened up Green Cheek, and I swore them off pretty quickly, where I just had this sneaking suspicion that they were trying to get rid of the worst lots that they could, and obviously that's just a really dumb theory, but anyway.
And of course, now as things have developed, especially if you order large enough quantities, they will process your own selections. It's a whole different world around this now, of course.
Yeah, and that's what I was about to say too, is that this game has changed so much to where within the last only 2 years, I have started to use cryo again, and holy cow, I mean, they've really honed in that process so well to where I think it's hard to say that that you can be a modern IP producer now and not use these products. Where I'm with you. I know Kelsey gave a quick little head nod of agreement whenever you said that blend of T90 with cryo, and I couldn't agree more. I mean, we recently did a 100% cryo beer. Recently, maybe 4 months ago, and it just it lacked the structure that on the palate. Like, one thing I think is that dry hop bitterness and that tannin that, like, I think is whenever you do it in a pleasant way, it would absolutely lacked that for me when it was 100% cryo. But then also it was so intense but then empty at the same time, which is such a, I know that's not the most complete sentence, but I have a hard time describing exactly what that is more than
I can see what you're saying, Evan. It's like listening to music where, like, the volume level, the it's compressed so much to pump that volume, but it lacks those like really nice juicy mid tones and like mid bass notes to kind of fill it out. Like it's not a full spectrum. It's just this really intense volume, right?
Yeah.
Evan, if I don't ask, I know Jamie will because I've listened to him interview people enough. What's the percentage break between T90 and the concentrated pellet?
Well, you gotta, like Jamie's so good at this, by the way, like, which is something that I, as a listener, I'm in love with, is that he doesn't stop asking the questions that are juicy, that the real meat and potatoes. And I personally, I'm in a spot where when we use cryo and we are really going for it, like if we're doing a double dry hopped beer, what we'll do is just keep the dry hop load the same as far as an amount, but then we will do 50-50 cryo and T90. And to me, those are some of my favorite DDH beers that we do. All those hops are going in at the same time. Hold on, that's such a... I can't even complete that sentence, actually, because it depends on the beer. Like, we make so many different beers, and we're constantly experimenting with what that is. And I think we briefed on this a moment, but I think the more cannabis-like a hop is, we're getting it in earlier and in the presence of yeast, and the brighter and more citrusy the hop character is, we're getting it in a little bit later to try to like hold on to those zesty, really wonderful like kind of fruit notes. And so you build the base, and then you just like get a little sprinkle on top, and bada bing, bada boom.
Kelsey, how about you?
We're usually in the 15 to 30% as cryo, and I'd say that's pretty standard. There have been cases where we've gone as much as like 65%, but usually I think maybe only once have we ever done all cryo, and I kind of have the same sentiment as Evan, where it lacks familiarity. It's like there's just a piece that's not there, that you're used to drinking dry hop beer, and it's not the same. It's punchy, it's intense, but yeah, it's a little out of the norm.
Yeah, it's like Neil Young talking about MP3s. He got it like he wants the vinyl action. You're giving him the whole piece.
That's a good analogy.
As an avid vinyl listener, I understand. I also disagree with Neil, because I think that there's a way. Anyway, we won't get into that. I'm gonna start talking about cheese next.
What?
I thought it was coming up.
I would never do that. I would never.
Question for you guys. We talk about cryo, but obviously, there's Lupomax, there's CGX, there's similar processes from other, it's almost like Kleenex. It's just facial tissue, but we've like drilled into the brand, and I mean, kudos to Yakima Chief for being such a first mover and creating that as a brand. Do any of these work in different ways for you, or do you use them interchangeably across all these brands?
Yeah, that's why I always say concentrated hop pellets to be
so political.
Yeah, exactly.
Political.
Yeah. Well, I'm doing a presentation at CBC with a couple friends, and it's on advanced hop product, and we need to be very, politically correct. But and it should also be remembered that this all started with a T45 pellet that's been around since like the 60s or something. Some historian out there can correct me, but a T45 pellet is a concentrated hop pellet that's been made in its format by mechanical refrigeration to cool it down instead of cryogenic. So they have been around. And back at when our brewery was at Corbel, we were using T45 as dry hopping. It was something that Gerard Lemons suggested to me, the Yakima Chief rep who I mentioned earlier. And I didn't know really why I was doing it, but in hindsight, it makes total sense. It's just now they've really locked in those aromatic compounds, no matter who it is. So. What was the question?
Well, I was gonna say, Jamie, in regards
Evan
to
gave
like,
us thumbs up. That means he's
Yeah.
got some.
All right.
He's got something to say about this.
well, when it yeah, like I've been going through different ways to use these like concentrated hop products. So you said, Vinny, by the way,
Or pellets, however you want to say it.
yeah, I mean, for cryo or CGX, we just started experimenting with using those for bittering, and in order to like have this really clean high alpha bitterness, we're talking about like a 25% alpha, with something, and so being able to use half the amount, maybe throw in a couple sprinkles throughout your boil to create a little structure, you can end up with less, you have less storage in your hop cooler. You have less vegetative matter in your beer, and so I'm really excited about this. Currently, we have 2 beers in the tank so far. They're unfinished at the moment, but they're showing a lot of promise on this front.
You should come to my presentation at CBC with Patty Aaron and a couple others. It's I believe on the Monday at 2:30, but this is exactly what it's about. But have you thought about using hop extract? That's a part of what we're going to talk about.
Oh, I mean, we've been using it for years, and I think you were the first person to turn me on to that. But I wouldn't be anywhere else, Vinny. I'm going to be front row, sitting right there. Kelsey,
I'll be sitting next to you.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah. We're going to be sitting next to each other.
I'll be there too. I might as well.
Okay.
It sounds like a great party.
I can't wait. What beers should we bring? Well,
because there you're getting up to like 50-60% alpha acid, and for a small brewery, still 150 gram tin, you can probably make that work for home brewers. I know they have those little shots of the little vials of extract, and it really does leave like such a clean flavor, like you were saying.
I know personally, like I really like those hop extracts for bittering, but similar to what we were talking about with the same type of thing of dry hopping with 100% concentrated pellet, like you're still missing something. And so you need to be very thoughtful as a brewer on how to structure the beer from there in order to create the hop tannin and bitterness that carries that beer through. Otherwise, it's going to be a single note of bitterness, and then you're going to be left without the linger that you're hoping for, or that mid palate, kind of bitterness. And so, yeah, it's another tool in the toolbox, I guess, but you just need to be thoughtful about the way you're using it.
I agree with that, especially like my favorite West Coast bittering hop, if I'm going for a more classic, sort of expression of West Coast, is First Wort Chinook in a T90. I love the sort of bitey, grippy, bitterness that's a little bit ragged edged that you get off of that. And I'm sure I could use other hops that are a little bit more old school in nature, but that one in particular is just so specific in its bittering quality and character. But if I want something that's a much more cleaner expression, it's usually been Warrior T90, but to that point, I could probably easily just sub in a Warrior extract or something along those lines and get like way cleaner, with that bitterness.
Vinny, we're about 15 minutes longer than I expected to go on this already. But if you've got any more hop questions, we should throw them out now. It's speak now, or forever regret what we didn't get to talk about here on this episode.
I think we covered everything that was thinking about after the last time. I think the maybe what I'll just leave it on, and it relates to a question that I asked Matt Brenelson when you were interviewing him with his Q&A, and something that I'm really curious about and don't know the answer to, and don't know that these guys do either, but just to put it out there for everyone that's listening, is is cell count and dry hopping, and like what's the right cell count when you dry hop. I know there's mid fermentation dry hop, but what is it when you get to, you're done with fermentation and your hops are in there? Is it better to wait a few more days to let more hops drop out and then you make that dry hop? There's still going to be lots of yeast in there. Or is it do it right away? Like I said, I don't know the answer to that, but to me, it's a really interesting question that would be cool for some master student or maybe it's already been done, I don't know, to do some work on it and figure it out. And maybe there's not the right answer. Maybe there is not a right or wrong answer, but there's at least some guidance there that we can follow.
I would love to have brewers working 24 hours around the clock so that I could actually dial in that to a level that I could speak on. But instead, we're a small operation and there's only so much we can do. And so I hope to someday, though, be at a level to where I can answer that question.
And I know there are breweries that dry hop based on cell count, but I don't know what the reasoning is. And, probably was just trial and error to figure it out. But it's a really interesting thought.
I love it.
Yeah. If you're listening out there and you base dry hopping on your cell count, drop me an email, jbogner@beerandbrewing.com. Let me know. Now, maybe we should start this up as a separate conversation and we'll get Vinny back on the podcast to drill down on that because, of course, the brewing world wants to know. If it's a question hanging out there, it's hanging out there. I feel like we need to, somehow pull out and leave this on some broader note in terms of excellence, in terms of the things that make the most difference of quality in these hoppy beers. As you've had 3 months to reflect on it since the last panel, suggestions for brewers out there that are trying to pursue excellence. What are the primary things that you think they should focus on? And let's start with you, Kelsey.
It really just comes down to, having a really clean process that mitigates exposure to oxygen at every step. And, if your ingredients are sound, everything's in good quality, you're dry hopping with fresh bags, you're not letting your hops get stale, anything that, downstream can cause your ingredient quality to degrade, you're not milling it on Friday and brewing on Monday, things like that. And, just ultimately thinking about freshness and oxygen exposure the whole way through. Make sure that you clean with PAA if you're not working with, deaerated water, and your tank is been sanitized, try and remove as much of that PAA from that tank as possible, purge it out with CO2, maybe give it an HLT rinse. Lots of different ways that you can do that. And then, when you open that tank to put in the dry hops, make sure that you've got, positive pressure, make sure that you're not letting anything get in, and then when you go to package that beer, whether it's into a keg or, into the cans or bottles or whatever you're doing, it's just, you got to make sure that you keep the oxygen exposure at a minimum. And I think that is the best thing you can do.
Evan, what are your keys to excellence?
I think for me, it comes down to, I think so many brewers, and I'm guilty of this myself at certain parts of my career, I think I end up with just too much ego over what they're doing, how they're doing it. They don't know why they're doing it a lot of times, but they're proud to do it. And long story short, I think that you kind of need to remove your ego as much as you can, and you need to look at your beer as unbiasedly as possible. And you need to assess it as if it was almost somebody you hate, where you're drinking this beer and all you can think about is, what shit can I talk about this beer? And hopefully you get to a spot to where there's no shit to talk, because that's what everyone else out there is going to do, especially like if you get yourself any accolades or whatever else. I think that like the first thing that people want to be able to do, brewers, is to be able to talk some shit on Vinny's beer because he's on the top of Mount Rushmore, and be able to like be like, oh, I made a better beer than Vinny, and that instead, I think just continuing to assess your beer as if somebody else made it is kind of like, I don't know, the best advice that I can throw out there.
I like that.
Guess it's my turn. I would say on a broad, because you guys both covered really great points there, but on a really from a broad level, taking like really, really good notes is like such an important part of brewing, and when you're making just even the most minor recipe tweaks. I mean, you should see some of my brew logs from the pilot brewery. They're chicken scratch, and everyone here at the brewery knows that my handwriting looks like chicken scratch, but just writing all those little tiny details down so you can go back and reference it next time to improve it. Because once you're making really good beer, getting to the next level is really hard because you're making such minor steps. And then on a real like actual fundamental level, and talked about it earlier, and specifically it's all beers, but relating it to IPA because it makes such a big deal with the hop aroma and hop creep is the yeast health. I'll go back to that. That yeast health is so important, and I wish we've always paid attention to our yeast, but not like we do now. We pay so much more attention to yeast health, and it's just paid in dividends for beer quality and hop aroma and that sort of thing.
Well, that is a great place to bring this episode to a close. I thought it was going to be shorter than the last episode. It is, but only by like 5 minutes. Here we are. It's been.
I thought we went for like 3 hours on the last one.
I actually did edit. I edited probably 20 minutes out of that one. Maybe one day we'll bring the outtakes from that one out there into the public. But I think for the time being, we'll just let everyone believe the illusion that we're this good at it, and that all together our Voltron powers together are stronger than anyone individually. And Vinny, anytime you want to host the podcast without me, just let me know. I'm happy to hand over question asking to you, because you're a pro at this. G&D Chillers to set the standard on quality, service, and reliability with 24/7 service and support. Raw Dextrin Malt is here to improve your beer with better body, improved haze formation, and stable foam. Try Old Orchard's flavored craft juice concentrate blends in your next craft beverage. Join the AccuBrew community and experience 24/7 peace of mind. ProBrew's rotary can fillers reduce waste and produce higher quality packaged beer. Try Indie Hop's unique varieties to modernize, brighten, and diversify your beers. Twin Monkeys offers customizable packaging solutions for every craft. Discover Soft Brew BR8, the first dry Brett by Fermentis, and ABS Commercial is your full-service brewery outfitter. Once again, if you're heading to CBC in Nashville, join us and our friends at Country Malt Group on Tuesday night at Yeehaw Brewing for the one-stop party with music by Goodbye June. If you are listening to this podcast and you are not yet a subscriber to Craft Beer and Brewing, or you are not yet an all-access subscriber to Craft Beer and Brewing, what are you waiting for? Two classes from Vinny, in that video format on how to brew better beer, both in terms of dealing with hop creep and with reducing oxygen throughout your brewing process. And of course, great recipes, both from Kelsey and from Evan and others. Of course, I think we've got some Russian River recipes in there too. Only there for subscribers. We appreciate your support. It is your support that allows us to bring these conversations and, this magazine out to you, because here we are in 2023 and we're still making print media. Yes, it's an amazing thing. Thank you all for supporting this thing that I have loved for so much of my life and love to continue to be able to do for you.
That's so sweet.
If people want to learn more about North Park, Kelsey, where do they find you guys?
Check us out on our website. You can either go to northpark.beer or northparkbeerco.com. Instagram at North Park Beer Co. Facebook at North Park Beer Co. Yeah.
And if you're in that Southern California area, I'm going down to HomebrewCon. I know we've talked about it a little bit, but we should probably schedule some sort of meetup or do something or get together for some beers.
Absolutely.
Are you guys going to that? I was going to go to that.
Oh, heck yeah.
I'll be there.
I'm going down there. Joe
sweet.
Stang, our managing editor's going. We're going to...
Oh, man. I think Kelsey and I were talking about pouring at that thing. Vinny, are you pouring?
I won't be there. No, not this time.
Oh, man.
Bummer.
Yeah, that should be fun.
Anyway, stay posted. We should we should just do something fun for HomebrewCon just because we're going to be there, right? Evan, if people want to learn more about Green Cheek, where do they find you guys?
greencheekbeer.com or, we have 3 locations, Orange, Costa Mesa, and Sunset Beach. You got to drink it from the source. It's the only way to do it.
It's true. It's true. Vinny, if people want to learn more.
RussianRiverBrewing.com. Facebook is at Russian River Brewing, and then Instagram is at Russian River Brewing Official, because at some point I think someone else had one going before we were cool enough to have Instagram. So
looking forward to seeing all of you guys at CBC, and then shortly after that we've got our Brewers Retreat out at Russian River and in Santa Rosa and Windsor, which is going to be a beautiful and amazing time. And then, of course, shortly after that, it's the Firestone Walker Invitational.
Wait.
And then I'm back in California for a third time in 5 weeks for HomebrewCon. Just going to be nonstop. It's going to be such a good time. Looking forward to seeing all of you all in various ways and permutations throughout the next couple of months. Thanks for joining me for episode 300. 300!
Yeah.
congratulations again.
Yes.
Yeah, congrats, Jamie. That's incredible. Incredible what you've built.
Awesome.
Appreciate everything that you guys have done to help contribute to that, and it's been pretty extensive. Cheers. We'll talk to you guys soon. Cheers.
Cheers.
Bye, Jamie.
Cheers.
Cheers.
This podcast has been brought to you by Craft Beer and Brewing Magazine for those who love to make and drink great beer. To learn more or to subscribe, visit beerandbrewing.com or find us on social media at Craft Beer Brew. Try Old Orchard's flavored craft juice concentrates in your... Try Old Orchard's flavored craft juice
Did you drink that younger?
He did.
Oh, yeah.
Oh, dude, crushed it.
And now I'm on Kelsey's
Oh,
triple
my
IPA.
gosh. Yeah, it's Friday, dude.
I'm going to get this right. It is Friday. I'm going to get this right. Try Old Orchard's flavored craft juice concentrate blends in your next craft beverage. Boom. Nailed it.